Thank you. Good morning. It feels like a spiritual conference with the sisters. A retreat. I want to begin just with a couple of observations. Last year in the symposium, I mentioned the icon that was done by Brother Carmel Duca, and he's an MC brother, and I brought it with me this year. In this format, I wanted to speak a little bit about it this morning as a visual doorway, almost like a summary of our charism, even in ways I think that were unintentional for him as the artist. Another observation by way of introduction is that, as you know, our co-founder, Father Joseph Langford, did a number of works, some of which have been published and others which are in the process of being edited or hopefully published in the future. And there was one more famous work that he did called Window in the Heart of God, and it went out in one of those bootleg formats all over the world. And it contained some testimonies from the beatification process, and it was suppressed. But over the years, it was edited and recently was given a green light to be published in the future. I mention that simply because originally his book contained around 1,500 citations from St. Teresa of Calcutta, our foundress. And as you might know, it's very difficult to find official citations. And the Mother Teresa Center has worked very hard and is in the process of publishing her letters, which I read will be in November for the general public. Sisters already have a copy of that. But the Mother Teresa Center is the official voice, as it were, for the citations of Mother Teresa. And so anyone who's going to publish or speak about her works, you can't use those editions that we would read at table for breakfast, apart from the fact that they might have oatmeal on them or something, but that the Mother Teresa Center went through her instructions and her letters so that their recognition is really important. And all the final edition of this work of Father Joseph contains around 700 citations that were officially approved by the Mother Teresa Center on all different topics, which is a great advantage for us because this Window in the Heart of God, unpublished, possibly publishable book of Father Joseph, his aim was to take different aspects of the charism as he saw it, as he understood it, and then show how Mother herself supported it by her quotations. And that was a source for me in what I'm going to speak about this morning. That was a great advantage to have those citations from Mother herself that have been approved by the Mother Teresa Center, which means that they're not spurious or, what would you say, possibly in the future suppressed because it wasn't actually her words. If you look on the internet or other sources, you'll find things that she supposedly said, but in actuality never really said. And the last little observation before starting is that Hans Urs von Balthasar said, to know the spirituality of Therese, Saint Therese, you have to study her life, because her spirituality is found in her life itself. And that's been helpful for me in looking at some of the mystics, and now that our mother, St. Teresa of Calcutta, is projected into that category. Because to understand the life of the mystics, you have to understand who they were and what they did and their whole environment. And extracting them from that or trying to distill them in a spiritual way or theological way to buffer certain points or explain certain things, for instance, like her darkness, loses the larger context of her life and who she was. So there's just a couple of observations. Holy Saturday in the Charism of St. Teresa of Calcutta, illuminating the dark holes of the poor with the Lumen Christi. Brother Carmel Duca, MC, is an artist, an author. He wrote that book, Redeemed by Beauty, which maybe some of you have seen. It's the unofficial version of the life of Brother Andrew, who was the co-founder of the MC Brothers. And the superiors, some years ago, asked Brother Carmel, he had written another book, something like, the title was 20 Years in Prison. He calculated over, maybe it wasn't 20 years, whatever, let's say 10 years in prison, how many days he had been in prison ministry, added them all up over his, 30 or 40 years as an MC brother, and it came out to 10 years. And the brothers asked him to research and write this version of the life of Brother Andrew. He's also an artist, and he's painted a number of different icons with MC themes. And one of them, at least for me, that was perhaps the most striking of what he's done, is this icon of the crucifixion of Jesus that portrays Our Lady, our mother, and then Jesus on the cross in more or less that traditional iconography style. You notice that both Mary and Mother Teresa are gazing down to that cave-like opening underneath. The black hole. It's his interpretation of the black hole. Has symbolic and religious significance, this way of portraying the crucifixion of Jesus. And other icons from other eras, you'll find that hole depicted because there's a long tradition that the dark hole represents a possible location of the tomb of Adam. For instance, Epiphanius of Salamis at Cyprus, he's from the 4th and 5th century, writes, "Our Lord Jesus Christ was crucified on Golgotha, nowhere else than where Adam's body lay buried. For after leaving paradise, living opposite it for a long time and growing old, Adam later came and died in this place, I mean Jerusalem, and was buried there on the site of Golgotha. This was probably the way the place, which means place of a skull, got its name, since the contour of the site bears no resemblance to a skull." There's this, at least this iconography that contains this reference to the tomb of Adam. But not only that, it's also considered to be the entry point of the underworld. There's a number of references in different sources. One that stands out is from Dante Alighieri in the 14th century. He describes the entrance of hell as being beneath Jerusalem. It contains that double significance, the entry point to hell and also the tomb of Adam. In fact, in icons of the resurrection, you sometimes see Jesus coming out of the same place, this portal, with Adam and Eve, and then King David or the patriarchs or the prophets on the other side. It's an interesting idea for me, how Brother Carmel takes this traditional image and then he infuses it with contemporary significance by associating it with the dark holes of the poor. Mother uses that term in a letter to Archbishop Perrier in 1950. And the charism of the Missionaries of Charity to go in search of those who are most in need. And this is, for me, an important consideration as we stand juxta crucem near the cross of Jesus. We're not frozen there. And in fact, after the last chapter of the sisters, right, there was an awakening emphasis on this idea of going out in search, going out in search of the poor in the dark holes. The icon then indirectly links the spirituality of Mother Teresa with the crucifixion scene of Good Friday, then in his interpretation, also then the descent into hell on Holy Saturday, and then by way of conclusion, Easter Sunday with the light of Christ, the Lumen Christi. And the words that he puts in Hindi, he didn't put temperature warning in Hindi, but that's but maybe it should be down below. Come, be my light, I want Indian nuns. Take me to the holes of the poor, Mary, Mother Teresa, and Jesus. I thirst, you did it to me. Now don't ask me to translate that Hindi, because I've asked a number of Hindi speakers to translate it, and I get different answers from them. I know what he intended. He intended these words, but what he actually painted, he's Maltese, might be a little bit of a variation. Someone even told me it was Bengali. But he took from the Founding Grace material and tried to arrange it with the hand of the Father from heaven, sending us out, wanting Indian nuns, and maybe sometimes American priests, I don't know, however his intentions were, and take me to the dark holes, which he paints over the entrance to hell, to the underworld. It's a very striking image. So this article aims at highlighting several of these theological images of our charism within liturgical movements of the Easter Vigil and portrayed in this simple religious icon of Brother Carmel. We know that Mother Teresa experienced innumerable mystical graces related to her call within a call, which is how we traditionally refer to it from her interview with Malcolm Muggeridge. 1946, I was going to Darjeeling to make my retreat. It was in that train. A lot of people like to associate it with the toy train, but some people say she was sitting in the train in Sealda Station, Sister Gertrude. So who knows? It's one of those trains between Calcutta, Siliguri, and then Darjeeling. The toy train maybe is the most romantic version because it's the most beautiful, curving around those mountains up to the hill station, which is at about 8,000 feet, I think, which is considered a hill because it's in the shadow of the Himalayas, right, in the distance. So those are hills. For us, they're mountains. And she says, on that train, I heard the call to give up all and follow him into the slums to serve him among the poorest of the poor. It was a call within my vocation, a call within a call, a second calling. And then politely omits the entire founding grace. That's all she reveals to Malcolm Muggeridge. And really to us as well, until 1997. There's that sort of pre-1997 understanding of the charism, and then the post-1997 with the founding grace material. She experiences then these mystical graces related to this call within a call on September 10, 1946. We call that Inspiration Day, and seemed to continue for several years until she began the work when she left August 17, 1948, went into the slums after some medical training, and then December 21st, 1948, is holding that dying woman and feels the need for a priest. So the birth of the MC Fathers, even before Sister Agnes arrived. So we kind of have precedence there. These interior anointings that she received were never explicitly revealed to her family members or companions in religious life. Nevertheless, much came to light with the accidental discovery of this trove of documents and letters, what we call the Founding Grace material, in the personal archives of her spiritual director, Father Celeste Van Exum. Thanks to Father Brian and the cause of the beatification that they went to Rome and pulled out this trunk that had been shipped there and discovered the letters, and then also, I guess, in the archives of the Archdiocese of Calcutta. So after Mother's death and the beginning of the work of her beatification, this material was discovered. And the publication of some parts of that Founding Grace material in connection to her beatification provoked a real confused media tsunami. For instance, Time Magazine, 2007, Mother Teresa's Crisis of Faith. Also 2007, from The Guardian, Was Mother Teresa an Atheist? Or PBS, 2007, Mother Teresa Struggles with Faith, all going in the same direction. But over time, in these years since her death, a new appreciation has grown of her interior life, one that begins to connect her interior darkness to the Paschal mystery. This deeper understanding of her spirituality complements the many popular pictures of her feeding a poor person in the home for the dying in Kaligat, or holding a sickly baby in Shishu Bhavan, the children's home, or serving food on the street of Calcutta, and now links her to the heights, to the summit of mysticism. Before she was connected to St. Teresa of Calcutta as a foundress, St. Teresa of Avila as a foundress, as a reformer. Now today there's also an understanding of Teresa of Calcutta as being similar to Teresa of Avila in terms of the mystical heights in which she reached. Given her heroic example of serving the poor and her enlightening spiritual teaching and lofty mystical graces, today there are groups even speaking about her becoming a doctor of the church. First she has to become a nurse, then she can become a doctor, right? But that her teachings are in that category. In 1984, Marvel Comics released a fictionalized account of her life and work that boosted her into the category of a modern superhero, with characters like Spider-Man, the Hulk, and Deadpool. This larger-than-life comic portrayal reflects her widespread popularity and acceptance as an official voice of the voiceless and the face of the invisible poor on a world stage. She embraced this role of roving ambassador of goodwill on behalf of her beloved poor with typical modesty and humility. However, today, because her spirituality is better understood than before, we do well to recognize that her public role, this persona, reflects the daily encounter with Jesus crucified on Calvary, John 19:28, and the cry of "I thirst." She says, 1996, "Let us spend our lives beside you. Really taste this prayer and understand it well. We are not refusing the joys that God will give us. No, we take whatever He gives. But we ask for the most important thing, to stand with Our Lady under the cross and hear Him say, 'I thirst,' and to learn from her to quench His thirst. This is where we belong as missionaries of charity." This isn't just simply the composition of place of St. Ignatius, and she was trained in that Ignatian spirituality, which is really the Ignatian spiritual exercises underneath, and does at times write in her letters things that are similar to perhaps meditations that you would make in the spiritual exercises. But this transcends that simple composition of place. These words ignited a secret fire within her. That phrase is from Father Joseph Langford, our co-founder, a homily he gave after her death. Because of Mother Teresa and her message, because of this secret fire entrusted to her, countless generations will come to know God better. And that's part of the irony of Mother Teresa, almost 50 years in spiritual darkness, and being associated with this fire, with this flame of love. She receives the words, "I thirst," as a burning cry for love. She says, it's very important for us to know that Jesus is thirsting for our love, for the love of the whole world. Ask yourself, this is 1983, have I heard Jesus directly say this word to me personally? I thirst. I want your love. In other words, this is not simply her mystical experience, which she's communicating to her followers. She's inviting you, without necessarily explaining what's taking place within her. This is 20 years before the founding grace is revealed. Have you heard him say, "I thirst"? Standing beneath the cross, standing with Our Lady. Have you heard him? If not, you examine yourselves. This is the composition of place. What she doesn't say is that mystically, I'm there every day, every moment. That, yes, that ascent is continual. That's my choice. That's my desire, to remain with him wherever he is suffering. But I'm inviting you to share in that. And the Missionaries of Charity just received this patrimonial vision without really questioning it or really asking what it meant. Burning cry for love. And that is directed to every suffering person, but especially the hearts that are most broken and wounded. Her daily encounter with Jesus crucified is a paradigm for all those that follow this spiritual path, and engenders a personal response with the words, "I satiate." So it's not enough to encounter those words, "I thirst." For her, that encounter provokes a response. I satiate. That's why she says, this is 1992, the very aim of our society is to satiate with your chalice the thirst of Jesus. Put your whole heart and soul in it, for this is our very life. We are there to satiate the thirst of Jesus for love for souls. All the prayers, all the sacraments, everything is that. Everything. This response is enshrined in the MC, fourth vow of charity, which calls for wholehearted and free service to the poorest of the poor. St. Teresa of Calcutta added a fourth vow to that triad of chastity, poverty, and obedience. 1950, it seems, when she had to send the constitutions to Rome so that that your branch, the sisters' branch, could become a diocesan congregation. And Archbishop Perrier asked her to write out the constitutions if there was anything she wanted to amend from those first rules, and she added at that time a fourth vow. She says, 1981, "My fourth vow is meant to be the burning flame of charity." Again, that fire reference while she's in the darkness. Father Joseph, our co-founder, says, "The entire world came to recognize and esteem her precisely for the witness of her fourth vow, for the new and unique service to the poorest of the poor she undertook in the slums of Calcutta and the world." The fourth vow of charity then reflects the response of Mother Teresa and each one of us in the desire to satiate the thirst of Jesus on behalf of the poor they serve. The fourth vow closely parallels the particular mission of the Missionaries of Charity and is formulated as follows: to labor at the salvation and sanctification of the poorest of the poor, not only in the slums, but all over the world, wherever they may be. One little parenthesis there, I didn't take that from your constitutions, right? Because I'm not really allowed to. However, other people have published, without permission, your constitutions. So I took it from there, even though I know what the words are in your constitution. So I didn't quote your constitutions, even though if I was looking at the same time at both copies. Just so you know, don't tell anyone that I copied your constitutions and then. This fourth vow and particular mission, as Father Brian mentioned, come to be associated with the final judgment scene in Matthew's gospel, especially the words, "Whatever you did to one of these least ones, you did it to me." Yeah, we know, "For mother, I thirst, and you did it to me," are those two poles, both sides of the cross, so to speak. Writing the words, "I thirst," on the left side, as it were, to encounter in our own heart of hearts and the brokenness and suffering of our lives, and then giving him to drink. This icon doesn't reflect that particular image that you find in the original explanation of the original constitutions, raising our chalice to give him to drink. This is a different interpretation. It reveals something, this "I thirst and you did it to me," reveals something very fundamental in Mother Teresa's charism and a pattern of grace. Father Joseph, our co-founder, used this term, pattern of grace, in his last seminar before his untimely death in 2010. He's making the analogy in relation to the Immaculate Heart. Her heart provides the pattern of grace, the Immaculate Heart, the bridge between contemplation and the movement of love, of "I thirst" and the mission to satiate him, of satiation itself, to save and to sanctify, salvation and sanctification of the poor. Our Lady connects them not only as ideas, but she connects them as fruitful endeavors. And using that word pattern for us is a reminder that these steps are patrimonial for us and that we can recreate her journey every single day. And that's how the charism is kept alive. If you look, for instance, at the morning offering prayers of the sisters in the MC prayer book, it's leading you to that daily encounter with Jesus on the cross through the Immaculate Heart of Mary as a victim of love. The terms are there without the explanation, without the exegesis. And so what you're praying, barely conscious, at 5:10 in the morning, might be later, 5:11, is you're saying that morning offering and renewing, without even realizing it, her experience. That's amazing. And you also do that continually as missionaries of charity by simple prayers, songs, and devotions, continually invoking Immaculate Heart of Mary, cause of our joy, pray for us. Sacred Heart of Jesus, we trust in you, placing us there beneath the cross. Brother Carmel's icon captures a fundamental reality of MC life in a graphic way by repositioning Mary and our mother, St. Teresa of Calcutta. Because while they're facing the cross, Jesus crucified, also he represents the poor in a way. They're looking down into the black hole. In the Founding Grace, the same great crowd, just to remember, in those three interior visions, that's the letter, December 3rd, 1947, to Archbishop Perrier by way of Father Van Exem, she mentions the crowd 3 times. I saw a very big crowd, all kinds of people, very poor, and children were there also. That's that first vision. The second one, again, the same crowd. The third vision, which is the crucifixion, the same crowd. They were covered in darkness, yet I could see them. Our Lord on the cross, Our Lady at a little distance from the cross, and myself as a little child in front of her. Her left hand was on my left shoulder, and her right hand was holding my right arm. We were both facing the cross. Mother Teresa's unprovoked depiction of the traditional crucifixion scene, recounting her vision, contains a few modifications that are significant, given her almost absolute silence surrounding these graces. In the interior vision, she sees herself as a child beneath the cross in the arms of Mary, St. John the Evangelist, St. Mary Magdalene, and others are missing in this vision. And she's taking their place, as it were. You could see St. John the Evangelist as a witness of the faithful. And so she's standing in his place, but as a child, not in this particular depiction. Symbolic imagery of the child immediately calls to mind connections with her namesake, St. Therese, of the child Jesus, and the Holy Face, and the little way of spiritual childhood, which we consider more than just October 1st, which is the day they shared, as St. Therese was her patronal feast, her namesake, but also that St. Therese teaches us how to reach the cross. If we're going to stand Juxta Crucem, there at the cross, we have to reach it first. Unlike the others, only John, right? The other apostles don't make it. It's a journey that we have to make as missionaries of charity, as followers of Mother Teresa and this spirituality, to reach the cross. We can't presume that we're there. It's a journey. For Mother Teresa, the journey is by becoming a child in the arms of Mary. The inclusion then of the poor in this third vision of the cross is relevant because her spirituality is so intimately linked to serving Jesus present in his distressing disguise of the poorest of the poor. 1983. If you really love Jesus in the Eucharist, you will naturally want to put that love into action by serving him in the distressing disguise of the poorest of the poor. Distressing because I'm looking at a poor person, and spiritually, I'm seeking the face of Jesus, his distressing, his suffering face. She repeatedly taught this to her followers. The poor are Jesus' Calvary today, 1979. 1981, the poor are Jesus in his suffering disguise. The charism of the missionaries of charity is to serve the suffering Jesus in the poorest of the poor. She says that Jesus is revealed in them. Father Joseph Langford, in beholding the face of the poor, we behold the face of Jesus. By revealing himself in his true glory, the glory of love, in the distressing disguise of the poor, we who have seen Jesus have also seen the Father. Mother's own interior visions, her writings, her speeches, identify always the poor with the crucified Jesus. The decision to remain always near the cross of Jesus in the darkness of Good Friday afternoon in order to console her suffering Lord is an intentional spiritual decision of Teresa of Calcutta that has become integrated into MC spirituality itself. From the first rules, 1948, number 1, the end, general end of the missionaries of charity is to satiate the thirst of Jesus on the cross for love and souls. The very first words, the first rules, the first location, so to speak. The mystical theology of the Carmelite reformers, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, can help interpret particular aspects of the charism of the missionaries of charity by way of spiritual analogy. But the MC place, or statio, our station, our location, position, is clearly identified with Calvary on Good Friday afternoon. Any question about where I am supposed to be, that is it, the mystical level. Herself as a child standing close to Mary under the cross can't be completely understood by the experiences and writings of other great saints. The mystical graces help define the reality of the chosen receptor, and they can be applied in a general fashion to the experiences of others because they speak profoundly to our common spiritual patrimony. And in some of our discussions in our community or around our chapter, that distinction of the gratia gratum faciens, the personal situation of the receiver in sanctifying grace, And then the gratia gratis data dimension on behalf of the church is important. She's receiving the graces for her own sanctification, but also on behalf of the church and the world. And that's true also of the great reformers, the great mystics, St. Catherine of Siena and St. Teresa of Avila, that we can learn from what they experienced. But it's also true to say that to understand the mystics themselves, we have to enter into their environment. We understand Mother Teresa's service of the poor comes as the fruit of this encounter with Jesus' thirst while remaining mystically present to him on the cross in those who are suffering. Her love for Jesus expressed in the response, "I satiate," is a call to action for every missionary of charity, and this is what's captured artistically in the icon of Brother Carmel. Mother Teresa's founding graces of 1946 to 1948 revealed Jesus' urgent invitation to every missionary of charity to go out in search of the poor dwelling in dark holes. This is 1947. "Carry me into the holes of the poor. They don't know me. They don't want me. How I long to enter their holes, their dark and happy homes." The dark holes of the poor, through the interior visions of Teresa of Calcutta, today have become a symbol of human suffering all over the world. And you could even equate them with those existential peripheries of Pope Francis. Calcutta itself became a central access point during the massive human mobility crisis of the 1940s related to Indian independence, religious tensions, and the creation of the Muslim state in East Bengal. Thousands of uprooted families lived on the streets of Calcutta before and after independence in 1947, while many constructed improvised shelters made of mud, sticks, cloth, etc. These impoverished housing developments often burned dried cow dung for fuel and used candles or kerosene lanterns for light, literally becoming dark holes, which were most likely observable if you've ever been to St. Mary's in Tally, from the room where she was in the Loreto convent, looking over the wall into the slums of Motijil in those days, which were filled with thousands of displaced persons. Also, the Anglophones of West Bengal were familiar with the phrase "Black Hole of Calcutta." In the 18th century, there was an incident that happened at Fort William in Calcutta where the Nawab of Bengal conquered the fort due to some concerns about a trading agreement that had gone bad, and imprisoned close to 200 soldiers in a dungeon. In the morning, only 20 came out. And in Calcutta language, that entered the idea of a black hole of suffering. This unfortunate event brought the words black hole into common parlance. Brother Carmel's icon, by turning the bodies and gazes of Mary and Mother Teresa towards the black hole under the cross, links Good Friday with Holy Saturday and the phrase from the Apostles' Creed, "He descended into hell." Artistically speaking, Mother Teresa and Mary stand in between the cross and the entrance to the underworld, which calls to mind the words of Pope Benedict XVI. Holy Saturday is a no man's land. In this case, a no woman's land, between death and the resurrection. But this no man's land was entered by one, the only one, the one who passed through it with the signs of his passion for man's sake, Passio Christi, Passio Hominis. This no man's land is precisely where the Holy Spirit anoints Mother Teresa's spirituality with the grace of the two essential poles of her charism. Remaining close to the cross of her suffering Jesus, how close, she says, we must keep to Our Lady, who understood what depth of divine love was being revealed as she stood at the foot of the cross and heard Jesus cry out, "I thirst," 1996, and satiating the thirst of Jesus by going out in search of the dark holes of the poor. The sisters would do the work of Christ in their very homes in the dirty and dark holes of the street beggars. That's an undated quotation. We know it is Jesus whom we serve in the poor because he said, "You did it to me," 1982. To satiate the thirst of Jesus on the cross, to bring Jesus to the people and people to Jesus, 1983. Her direct call of service to the poorest of the poor in their dark holes calls to mind the spiritual descent into hell of every Christian who reflects on the meaning of Holy Saturday. Well, the Catholic Church teaches that Christos descendit ad inferos, Christ descends into hell after being placed in the tomb. It's not a doctrine that's completely understood by the faithful or preached with regularity, even though its reality has been recognized from the early church. The Metropolitan Hilarion Aleyev, Orthodox theologian, writes, "The descent of Christ into Hades is one of the most mysterious, enigmatic, and inexplicable events in New Testament history." It's beyond the scope of this little article here to delve into the lengthy consideration of what the theology of the descent into hell means. But we can say Mother Teresa's call for every missionary of charity to follow her in the daily search of the dark holes of the poorest of the poor, coupled with the artistic viewpoint of Brother Carmel's icon, creates a favorable condition for just a couple sentences of reflection. Almost from the moment of the discovery of the founding grace, the darkness of St. Teresa of Calcutta has been interpreted with great liberality in relation to the theology of John of the Cross, derived from his poem, La Noche Oscura, the dark night. And then there was a discussion in the last talk about this apostolic night, Father Brian was mentioning, of Teresa of Calcutta, or this night of reparation. Our concern lies in framing the interior suffering and spiritual darkness of St. Teresa of Calcutta almost exclusively within the context of Carmelite spirituality. Little has been written about her perpetual desire to remain close to her suffering Lord on Calvary. We're not refusing the joys God will give us, she says. We take whatever he gives, but we ask for the most important thing, to remain there, juxta crucium, to hear Jesus say, "I thirst," and to learn from Our Lady how to quench his thirst. This is where we belong as missionaries of charity. That's 1996. We have to consider each milieu of every mystic as a starting place of interpretation. And while the spiritual masters can help us interpret charisms and spiritualities in contemporary language, there will always remain elements that are considered specific to each saint and mystic. Mother's quote, which has been mentioned a couple times already, "If I ever become a saint, I will surely be one of darkness. I will continually be absent from heaven to light the light of those in darkness on earth." 1962, that's to Father Neuner. This sentence underlines the intensity of her desire to always serve the poor, even after she reaches her final reward, even from heaven. Honestly, it's difficult to see how this zeal relates to the involuntary purifying nights of John of the Cross, given that it's her personal choice to remain close to the cross and accept the effects of what that brings, including the spiritual darkness. In the descent, it's her choice to remain in the darkness of Good Friday, and by extension to go out in search of the poorest of the poor by remaining near him in the descent to the dark hole of the underworld. She appears to have entered a new mystical territory with these unusual aspirations. We know that St. Therese also said, "I wish to spend my heaven in doing good upon earth." The missionaries of charity, imitating their foundress, work daily to bring the light and life of Christ himself to those who reside in the most extreme conditions of poverty and suffering. Pope Benedict XVI speaks of how the descent into hell parallels the depths of human misery. Jesus Christ descended to the dead. What do these words mean? They mean that God, having made himself man, reached the point of entering man's most extreme and absolute solitude, where not a ray of love enters, where total abandonment reigns without any word of comfort, hell. The charism of the missionaries of charity leads to the living hell of the poorest of the poor who reside in spiritual and material darkness. Jesus says to her in 1947 in the locution, "My little one, come, carry me into the holes of the poor." This is the important part. Come, be my light. I cannot go alone. They don't know me, so they don't want me. Interestingly, at that moment, the Lord does not direct her to initiate any kind of specific material work, opening a soup kitchen, starting an orphanage, founding a home for the dying. But he does ask her to share his light with those most in need. And divine providence will eventually provide the means for her and her followers to create an amazing array of services for her beloved poor around the world, and for which she's awarded the Nobel Prize in 1979. Hans Urs von Balthasar writes that the Eastern Church considers the descent into hell as a central part of the redemption itself. He says, "To be sure, one can, as the Eastern Church customarily does, see the decisive image of the redemption in the descensus, that is, the breaking down of hell's gates and the liberation of prisoners. Time innumerable icon painters, like Brother Conroy, depicted that scene, the true image, Easter image of the East. The entire work of the Triduum Mortis is perceived as a single movement, which on Holy Saturday reaches its supreme and dramatic intensity." Coming to the conclusion, the artistic rendering of Mother Teresa's interior vision points to several important considerations about the mystical meaning of her actions. The first is she freely chooses to remain close to Jesus on the cross each day of her life. This is her, you could say, mystical intentionality, remaining close to Jesus perpetually. It might appear to border on psychological fantasy to some, but it's a constant theme in her spirituality and reinforced in the daily schedule and regimen of prayers followed by the missionaries of charity each day. So, for instance, in their devotional prayer book, Examination of Conscience, Friday, with Our Lady, who stood near the cross, put your resolution near Jesus crucified and ask, is this love for love? Continual reminders of our statio, of our place, which also means that Mother Teresa accepts the consequences of remaining that close to Jesus. Desolation, spiritual darkness, aloneness, everything that's affiliated with that interior purification. The darkness is so dark and I am alone, unwanted, forsaken. When you ask to imprint your passion on my heart, is this the answer? She asked Jesus. It's an undated letter. 2, this intention is incorporated into MC life by way of the general aim to quench the thirst of Jesus on the cross for love and souls, and the particular mission to work at the salvation and sanctification of the poor, as well as the devotional and prayer life of the members of the congregation. 3, Mother Teresa desires to satiate the thirst of Jesus by her wholehearted and free service to the poor, this raising of the chalice to give Jesus to drink in union with Our Lady. She says, let us always remain with Mary, our mother, on Calvary, near Jesus with our chalice raised, always held up to his suffering heart, so that he may be pleased to accept our love. Undated instruction. 4, this same missionary impulse sends her out in search of those who remain in the dark holes of suffering and pain, the living hell of the poor. Missionaries of charity interpret this injunction from Jesus, the founding grace material, come be my light, as a call to walk the peripheries of the earth, and like the Good Samaritan, which John Paul called her an icon, St. John Paul II, an icon of the Good Samaritan, and render service to those who are most in need. Mother Teresa's call is united to Good Friday, Juxta Crucem, and the suffering of Jesus on the cross. It's also extended to all those who are suffering in the world. And also by analogy to the descent into hell, by the invitation, come be my light, and enter into those dark holes, the living hell of the poorest of the poor, but not alone. Carry the light of Jesus into those dark holes. Pope Benedict XVI alludes to Easter Sunday in his encyclical Spe Salvi when he writes, Christ descended into hell and is therefore close to those cast into it, transforming their darkness into light. This closeness to the suffering poor is symbolic of the service rendered by St. Teresa of Calcutta to those who are most in need by bringing them the Easter light of the resurrection as a living paschal candle and reflecting this Lumen Christi, this light of Christ, chanted in procession on the Easter Vigil, so that her spirituality becomes a theological, liturgical, and artistic bridge spanning the distance between the light of Christ and the darkness of that hour of his glory. It's not a perfect image, this icon, this rendering of Mother Teresa's interior vision, and it fails, for example, to capture the childlikeness that's a sine qua non in her mystical revelation. Although she is shorter than Our Lady, maybe that's the littleness, but she was also a little person. While the icon anticipates and projects her entrance into the dark hole of the poor by the painted words, "Take me into the holes," it could be mistakenly interpreted as a purely sympathetic point of view from above, as opposed to an empathetic solidarity of the Good Samaritan. Still, Brother Carmel accurately captures the inherent mystical tension and the mystery of remaining always near the cross of Jesus while serving him in the dark holes of the poor and suffering. I appreciate the artistic risk of identifying Mother Teresa with the living hell of the poor, and by implication, the glory and the light of the resurrection. In short, this icon becomes a simple catechism of the spirituality of St. Teresa of Calcutta, and by entering into it, this doorway, you enter into the painful darkness and redemptive light that is contained within this charism. The simple painted icon reflects the mystical call of St. Teresa of Calcutta and her followers to remain near Jesus on the cross in the darkness of Good Friday afternoon and to go in search of those who don't know me and don't want me. The service of this modern-day Good Samaritan, while striking in and of itself, is reflective of a journey that starts near the cross on Calvary, descends into the hell of the poorest of the poor, and reflects the Easter light and glory of the resurrection. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for question and answer. Please grab the mic. I don't know exactly where the mic is at this current moment, but we'll have it passed around. So any questions?
Hello. No, when you were talking, I was remembering Mother's words in instruction. Sometimes she'd say, it was open Calvary. It was open like it's almost like, I can't even recall the scenes. Maybe the sisters would know. Like if she went to a war zone or she went to one place where it was so bad and she could only express it was open Calvary. Like almost not a joy that she found it, but like, I'm thinking of this picture, open Calvary. It's not a hidden thing. It's like to find Jesus in the poor. It's like a mystery, it's hidden, and you have to search for him. But when she would say it was open Calvary, it was so obvious. This is the foot of the cross. And in Founding Grace, I think she said, at one point when it was the darkness, he's left. But I find him when I'm in the street, when I go out, when I'm in the streets, I feel him with me. His presence is almost tangible. Do you think, like you're saying, our call to go out into the streets, or to go and search, Jesus purposely maybe keeps us dry and to draw us out. So when we're out there, like Mother, is this tangible presence? I don't know. Does that something make sense?
Yeah, it seems like part of the charism is this divine rhythm of going out in search of Jesus in the poorest of the poor. It's a mystery of Jesus present on Calvary, on the cross, and then his distressing disguise in the poorest of the poor. Jesus beaten, scourged, crowned with thorns, nailed to the cross, almost unrecognizable. And then that poor person on the street. And for her, even those pictures that you see, a sister serving a poor person in Kaligat, and then the words body of Christ next to it, right? Those constant reminders that although I have to say this part for me until the Founding Grace came out, the idea of come be my light, that I believed that I was going out to serve Jesus, present in the poorest of the poor. But I never really saw myself as an agent of light. That really transformed things for me in that sense, because I can be aware of my own poverty, right? And he's speaking to me also, because it's not just a cliche to say that I'm the poorest of the poor. He's searching in his thirsting love for that most wounded, most vulnerable place within me. And that's where you could say that light is present within me, that seed of redemption. So when I go out to the poorest of the poor, I'm looking for that suffering, that need of the light. And that divine rhythm of going out and coming in, and through the Eucharist, Jesus in the Eucharist and Jesus in the poor, seems like it's essential for her, and also in your branch in that recovery of going out in search, and even divesting yourselves of a lot of works, or in some cases almost institutional kinds of works, to be free to go out and search, that there's something inherent in the charism itself, in the going out and discovering him. That's a great testimony, no? Say like aspirants or postulants, I found, and I saw, that kind of testimony is very beautiful.
Thank you, Father.
Any other questions? One more question.
Father, could you say something about Mother's own dark holes? You mentioned to look at her life, and what came to mind was the fact that she lost her father at 9 in a very tragic and violent way. So do we have any more information, or what's your opinion on Jesus thirsting for her there and illuminating that abandonment of the Father? Thank you.
I think we can study her life, and it will be helpful. Father Brian's working on the biography, which will be a great assistance in the future. One thing that stands out for me, though, like you're mentioning Skopje, is the coincidence, the providence of World War I beginning almost in her backyard in Sarajevo. I think that's like 250 kilometers as the crow flies. Literally, the beginning of World War I, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And then those years, that's like 1913, very small, but her childhood is part of the suffering of World War I. 1917, she's 7 years old, Our Lady of Fatima, right? And that message for the Catholic Church at that time, that's disseminated. The war ends in 1918, but something worse will come. And then World War II, when she's in Loreto in Calcutta, and the consecration of the World of the Immaculate Heart, the establishment of the Feast of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, how she couldn't live those experiences. But I agree, the suffering of her childhood is the way the Lord is preparing her to take her to the cross. And you can really follow that all the way up to 1942, April, where she makes that vow to never refuse, to always discern, to always be open. And then just a couple years later, September 10th, 1946, that infusion of grace. So, of course, I think what she lives in her own personal experience is what we, her followers, recreate in our own way through formation and seeking that stripping down. And even the way the simplicity of life, or the MC poverty, to not allow any distractions to get in between me and Jesus.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.